Hi, I'm Nadia Lewis-Gorton from DDE, and today I'm here to talk with you about Windrush, a little bit about the scandal as well as the history behind the scandal. So, what exactly was the scandal? In 2018, it was revealed that the landing cards of West Windrush immigrants were destroyed by the Home Office. This made it difficult for people living within the hostile environment to prove that they had arrived in the UK legally, and therefore they became subject to deportation. So, what impact did this scandal have? It saw hundreds of Caribbean immigrants living and working in the UK for decades targeted by immigration enforcement. As a result, many elderly people were suddenly being barred from their jobs, refused access to government services, lost access to welfare as well as their pensions, and in some cases, some were detained and deported. And for individuals that were out of the country on vacation or for any other reason, some had difficulties getting back in. Some did not get back in at all. So, in understanding Windrush and the scandal, we need to understand who the people were that carried the label Windrush generation and how they came to be in Britain. So, Windrush is the term used to describe immigration of West Indian people from the Caribbean to the UK between 1948 and 1971 from countries such as Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and other smaller Caribbean islands. The people who came to Britain during this period, it is important to note they came as British citizens from British-controlled colonies to aid in the rebuilding of Britain after World War II. Some came at the invitation of the government, while others came to help to rebuild the mother country. In order to understand citizenship and the idea of mother country, one has to understand the concept of empire. At its height, the British Empire covered 25% of the world's land surface, and they exerted control in some form or the other over North America, Australia, Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, among other places. So this is a pictorial representation of some of the countries that were within the British Empire. And if you look there, you're seeing places like Grenada, New Zealand, Palestine, South Africa, Trinidad, Singapore. Right? As it relates to the Caribbean in particular, power was exerted in the form of colonization. What does this mean? This means that as colonies, the countries were under the direct rule of the British government and had no sovereignty. It's also important to note that after slavery was abolished in 1833, Britain still maintained control over these islands way into the 60s, so approximately 30 years after. However, this in and of itself did not make people of these countries citizens. It made them subjects of the British Empire. But what did make them citizens was the British Nationality Act of 1948. So what is the British Nationality Act? So basically in 1948, it was written into law that every person born within the United Kingdom and its colonies and the colonies after the commencement of the act shall be citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies by birth. So, which explains all the passports you saw earlier. So if you were living in any country under British controller that was a colony of Britain, you were considered a British citizen. So why would Britain do this? Britain needed to revive its industries and grow its economy. The aim was to gain access to both skilled and unskilled labor, as the labor force had fallen by 1.3 million, and this was due to casualties of war, working population had retired, as well as emigration. More than 2 million people emigrated from the United Kingdom after the war. People were leaving UKs for countries such as Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Basically, they were leaving for the old Commonwealth. As a result, British government had to turn to the new Commonwealth as a source of labor. The new Commonwealth would consist of places like Jamaica and Trinidad, so the Caribbean in essence. So what do I mean by the invitation? The demand for both skilled and unskilled labor continued to grow throughout the 50s. As the economy started to recover, employers and managers in key sectors began to actively recruit in the Caribbean. The NHS, for example, sent managers to various parts of the Caribbean to recruit nurses and young women to come to Britain and train as nurses. Politicians visited and actioned this cause, as well as matrons of the NHS. By 1955, 16 British colonies had set up recruitment centres that were encouraging young women to come work as nurses, and just to ensure that there was a ready and constant supply of individuals to fill these positions. London Transport Company also recruited. In Barbados, they recruited more than 3,500 individuals over a 10-year period from 1956 onwards. They paid the workers' fares to the UK, and then they recovered this money through a deduction from wages, which was a common practice that tied economic migrants to particular types of employment. The British Hotels and Restaurants Association also recruited in Barbados. As it relates to individuals who were not recruited directly, they came via paid passage. What that means is that they basically paid their way. They paid to come. Why would they do this? Some came because they were members of the Royal Air Force and had fought in World War II on behalf of Britain, and some came because the mother country needed to be rebuilt, and they just saw it as rebuilding their own country. The move to the mother country did not come without its problems. People arriving from the Caribbean faced economic and social discrimination. Upon arrival, they were often faced with discrimination. They were denied jobs and accommodations on the basis of race. Additionally, almost half the individuals who came from the Caribbean to the UK in the 1950s had more skilled workers, and they possessed excellent employment credentials. However, they only got jobs or were allowed to take jobs that were considered undesirable, so street cleaning, general labor, and jobs that demanded antisocial hours, so working night shifts. Over half the men from the Caribbean initially accepted jobs of a lower status than which they were qualified. And women who were qualified as nurses had some of the most menial tasks within the NHS. So here, for example, speaking of hostile environment, we look at this news headline, and it says 200 jobless Jamaicans come to Britain. Suggesting that they came only for that reason, and not that the other half that they didn't mention came at the request of government, or that they were skilled workers. So in 1971, the immigration rules changed. So there was a restriction on primary immigration from the Commonwealth. So what that means is no one else was allowed to come in as before, but anyone that was already in the country was granted indefinite leave to remain. However, no official documents were issued. Individuals who qualified for leave to remain would not have sought papers, as their information would have been captured on their landing cards or that of their parents. But as mentioned earlier, these were destroyed in 2010, leaving them unknowingly undocumented. The hostile environment 70 years later. So the hostile environment initially was discrimination based on discrimination based on race and difficulties getting jobs and places to live. However, the discrimination 70 years later was more around a hostile environment, which was created by the Home Secretary. So, what exactly is the hostile environment? Basically, it required landlords and NHS staff and other groups within the general public to demand evidence of citizenship and report individuals that were not able to produce same. This resulted in the detention and deportation of individuals who were legal citizens but had no proof and was not able to get any, as their landing papers were destroyed. So since the scandal broke in 2012, the government has since offered apology as well as compensation to individuals who have been impacted. However, the process of claiming compensation has been quite difficult. Alexander Accra, former barrister who was the scheme's head of policy, is quoted as saying, "Unwillingness to provide information and guidance to ordinary people, so ordinary people can understand." Let me read that again. She was quoted as saying, there's an unwillingness to provide information and guidance that ordinary people can understand, which is pointing to the fact that even though there's an offering of compensation, the whole process is complicated in getting to claiming such. Additionally, the compensation will not and has not erased any of the trauma that individuals have suffered throughout this process.
My name is Euten Lindsay, and here is my Windrush story. Okay, I was born in Kingston, Jamaica in 1964 and arrived here in the UK in 1973. Now, my story began in 2009, or shortly after 2009, when I took redundancy after 6 years working at Addington Palace. I had a friend who basically thought that I needed a break and to recharge my batteries, and invited me to come to Kia in Plymouth to have a break, which I did. And this happened in 2010. And I would say, after spending 2 weeks, I returned back to London, packed my bags, and returned to Plymouth, where I settled. And being here now, in August of 2021, it will be 11 years. So that is definitely reason for celebration. A brief history. I am a qualified, trained chef, cuisine, and a beverage manufacturer. In 1989-94, I attended Westminster Catering College, gained my sitting guilds for cooking, for the catering industry. Worked in some fine dining restaurants and hotels and private members clubs. In my history, in 1995, I launched my first restaurant in Covent Garden, and I would say 2003, I worked for Addington Palace Limited, an amazing place, as the executive head chef and catering manager for six and a half years, I think. Then in 2012, I became self-employed and has remained self-employed on and off ever since, up until even now. Okay. Favorite childhood memory, my word, has to be growing up with my grandmother, who I called my mummy. She was very in touch with her African heritage, and reminded me of the importance of family and to maintain our culture. She taught me about herbal remedies and would send me to collect herbs from the yard, which is basically like a back garden but much bigger. And I would say ingrained in me always to, yes, show love and respect. And I would say my early cooking experiences was ingrained through her, and followed by my mother, who would have me cooking the Sunday dinner, which you dare not burn, especially the rice. So I learned not to cook. Well, sorry, I learned not to burn rice, and I, yes, would say through my grandmother, yes, she still lives in me, through characteristics and her past and her culture to me, and the history. So I'm really proud, yes, for that. Favorite foods? Whoa. Fish and vegetarian foods, I would say. I'm very much into, yes, organic and just, yes, no artificial intake as that. Okay, especially my food. Favorite fish, definitely snapper, Eskimo snapper, and can't, yeah, ackee and saltfish, which is Jamaica's national dish, and of course, whoa, my word, sweet potato and callaloo, rice and gungo peas and mango and guava and soursop. Oh, could continue, but I won't. Okay, so I am truly touched because, as I say, what do I really love about my heritage? Well, got to say, being born Jamaican, due to its history, rich history, and its diversity, melting pot of cultures and cuisines, which again, through our colonial rulers, no need to mention Spain, Great Britain, now the UK, and of course migrant workers such as the Irish, the Dutch, Indians, Asians, yeah, and the list continues. And of course the natives, yes, again gave us so much, and of course Jamaica, which is land of wood and water and so plentiful. So yes, my heritage very vast in deep in history. Do I feel a connection with Windrush? Definitely. I would say, without realizing it, in 2010, I began having problems with the Department of Work and Pensions and the Home Office. Sanctions were made where I was not allowed any public funds, no NHS or dental treatment, unless, of course, I personally paid for it. Was not allowed any benefits, not allowed to work due to the loss of my Jamaican passport, which was deemed the only form of identification for myself. Again, this was due to the, well, yes, I would later realize that this was due to a, hostile environment in regards to immigration, especially to those from the African Caribbean sector. So, not allowed to travel out of Plymouth, unable to travel to London to see my children, or my family, or my friends, not having, having to report to the immigration office weekly at Charles Cross Police Station, always fearing that I could be detained and deported, because the threat of deportation was made numerous times. Wow, and I actually feel it even now, the impact it had on me. Fear, door knocking, I would jump, I would hide, pretend I wasn't even there. Yeah, it so happened that in 2018, my status became more serious as I was made aware that my status in the UK was illegal and I could be deported if I could not prove that I was granted leave to remain in the UK in 1973 when I was a child. So yeah, I was only 9 years and 6 months old, and I had to somehow provide proof. So with the help and support from Devon and Cornwall Refugee Support Group, who are based in Plymouth, Devon, and the Citizens Rights Bureau, the Red Cross, and yes, my local councillors, I was able to gather data going back 43 years, and which I was then able to provide all these documentation, and this then gained me a successful outcome, obtaining my no settlement, which is no time limit, and I remembered being invited to the Home Office in 2018 to basically be interviewed, and where I was then told that yes, I am here legally. Why? Because I am a Windrush generation, and that what I'd been through was wrong. So I am currently in the process, a tedious process of this Windrush compensation application, and awaiting news as to the overall settlement. I would say I received a letter stating that by March of 2021, I should be receiving a preliminary £10,000 compensation, and that I would then be contacted and made aware if more is to be awarded for the impact of this hostile environment which impacted the Windrush generation. Thank you, Euten Lindsay. Thank you.